Welcome to a brand new episode of Into the Ashlands podcast. I am your host, Eric Malachite, author and illustrator. Let's go ahead and talk about what's going on right now with me. Right now, Eldrtich, Blasphemies, and Technological Horrors has officially released, and I am extremely fucking excited about that. I hope you are too. It's available on Amazon Kindle, Smashwords, Apple iBooks, Barnes & Noble, all sorts of places. Just search for it and you'll find it. And be sure to read the fuck out of it and share it with your friends. Really. In addition to that, Echoes of Olympus Mons Part 2 is set to come out on Halloween night for $1 patrons, and $5 patrons get access to the second part of the story 7 days earlier, and that's pretty awesome. And you can get access to the first part of Echoes of Olympus Mons, the first 3 chapters, by clicking the link in the description to go to my Patreon. And of course, one more announcement. Messages from the Abyss will also be coming out on Halloween night. We've got a doubleheader again this month. And I think next month might only be Echoes. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Neo Rackham 2, because I'm still writing it and drafting it, but I want it to be as good as I can possibly get it before I release a definitive version of it, because I don't like to charge my patrons for stories that are half finished. That just doesn't seem right, you know? You know what I mean? Okay, so with that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about today's topic. And it's all about one of my favorite fucking topics in the world, dialogue tags. And dialogue in general, character, voice, tone, getting across accents, but really dialogue tags. That's the meat of this subject, because I hate colorful dialogue tags. It is a personal pet peeve of mine. Even great books that have colorful dialogue tags, like "he said angrily" or something like that, you know, it's really grate on my nerves. Cause me to instantly eye roll when I read one of these tags. And really, it's true that "said" is a transparent word. Readers almost never notice it unless they are trying to notice it. And those that have told me, well, you know, in creative writing class, you know, my instructor told me never to do this because blah, 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 or to use as colorful language such as "he ejaculated." Don't listen to that instructor. They are wrong. But, I mean, some people swear by dialogue tags, and I don't understand why, to be honest. I mean, you can convey 90% of a range of emotions through your dialogue rather easily, through that dialogue alone, without the use of these extra adjectives, adverbs, ly verbs, you know. And even through dialogue beats, which is a description between a sentence of dialogue and a finishing sentence of dialogue. I don't know if I described that very well. But even those shouldn't be overused. I have seen many writers who have attempted to completely eliminate "said" and colorful dialogue tags with dialogue beats, and it doesn't work because it clutters up the dialogue. There is something to be said for very clean dialogue that comes across to the reader and easily speaks to the reader as those characters. Because if you've developed your character well enough, if you've developed their voice, your readers will start to hear a certain voice when they are reading your story. For instance, I've got a character in my second novel that I'm working on, and he's kind of a bit of a bro, you know. I mean, he says things like, you know, "that's so alpha," and yo, and what else does he say? He says, like, "I got you, B," and stuff like that. But that speaks to a certain kind of person that would say those things. Maybe it's your typical YouTuber, garbage tier YouTuber, you know, shots fired. Or, you know, someone from a Spanish background might phrase their sentences slightly differently than someone who grew up here in the States when speaking English. Or, you know, the same is true of Russian or Italian people, you know, who grew up with a different language, and just people in general speak differently. They choose different words, so and different ways to arrange their sentences. So one person raised in the same area might speak completely different from someone who grew up right next door. It depends on that person, what their likes, their interests are. And really, you want to avoid characters all sounding the same in your book. You really want to avoid that because characters get confusing, and if everyone's this massive intellectual, which would make sense if you're, say, writing a story set in the Arctic where everyone's a researcher of some sort and an alien starts possessing people's bodies, like a certain John Carpenter film that's really famous. But each of those people can be from different backgrounds, so you can diversify how they speak and, what their backgrounds are, obviously, because they're characters, they're people, make them feel like people. But one of the ways to weaken your dialogue is by using anything other than said, or by having too many, and let me stress, too many dialogue beats. Because, you need to be the judge of what is appropriate for how many dialogue beats you use in a string of dialogue. But generally, I try not to use more than 2 or 3, and even then that might be going a little overboard. Because you don't want to confuse your readers. Because even if each of your characters has a very unique way of speaking, it can still confuse them if they don't know who is speaking. If you don't once in a while drop in a blank character said and, or blank character asked. That's like the exception right there. Asked is okay. I think it's okay. I use it sometimes. It makes sense. I've had editors correct me when I just, for a question, I put blank character said instead. But I have seen writers do that. Published writers, very successful writers, New York Times bestsellers, so don't give me this shit that it's incorrect, because I know better. I read with my eyes. Yeah, I'm talking to you, editors. Okay, so I think I've ranted enough about dialogue tags. Let's talk a little more about character, and specifically how you can convey aspects of your character through dialogue. Essentially showing the readers who they are, giving them hints to their backgrounds through dialogue. And this can be really easy because, characters are going to talk about things that they care about. They're going to let things slip through. Let's say that your character is a huge Star Wars fan, because I'm staring at a loot crate box with a bunch of Star Destroyers and shit on it. They're probably going to drop a Star Wars reference here and there, even if it's thinly veiled, and I'm not saying do this because who knows what kind of, legal problems will arise from even quoting famous works, unless they're in the public domain or they're so famous that you can't avoid them in society. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, so don't fucking listen to me on this. But, say if there's a fictional show in your universe, in this book, maybe they're a big fan of it. I think a great example of this is the 2012 TMNT series that has Leonardo, the leader of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a huge nerdy fan of a Star Trek analog called Space Heroes, and he's constantly referencing it. And in fact, the show did this thing where they would have a short little clip, an animated clip of Space Heroes, determine the theme of the episode, and it was really clever. But, he's a huge nerd, and in past incarnations of the character, he's usually the very stoic, straight man character, and he's still that way for the most part in that series, but it's an extra dimension of his character. Let's say your character's really into cyberpunk or something. Maybe they would say things like, I don't know, let's go meet in meat space, or, because they're always online or something. You can also drop in, different kinds of slang that they would use, such as, maybe your characters say dog a lot. Maybe they don't, because personally that grates on my nerves, but everyone's different, right? But that should be the point, everyone is different, so your characters are going to have a lot of different likes and dislikes, and incorporating these things into their dialogue, including words that they would use specifically, maybe even it would help to develop a vocabulary list that they have of words they typically use and drop into sentences. It might make sense. And even using those things, and I know this is a bit off topic, but it's kind of related because we're talking about character voice, right? And their voices, when they're talking in dialogue, well, that's their character voice. That's them speaking. So if you're using third person limited or first person, a lot of those vocabulary choices that you wrote down would be very useful in conveying the world that they see. Because every different character is going to view things differently. They're going to take in information differently. Someone might see a dingy old house, a 100-year-old house, and be creeped out by it, think that it's creepy, haunted, or needs to be bulldozed. And someone else might see it and say, that's really beautiful. I admire the architecture of these older houses. These newer houses, they're just all cookie cutter shapes and things like that. All of these things can add dimension. But I think I've ranted enough about this for now. I'm probably going to revisit this topic again. You can be sure of that, because I really am passionate about using said in your dialogue and conveying character voice through dialogue. Usually, since I'm kind of a pantser, which is somebody that ad-libs most of the first draft of their story, which would drive people nuts, which is not really true, because I don't outline things, except for in my head. I always have a loose outline working in my head, and that works for me. It doesn't work for other people, but I'm crazy, just so you know. So don't try that. It doesn't work for everyone. Usually I rewrite the characters as I go, and I fix them and stuff in second drafts. It's just how I work. But I'm very passionate about character voice, and I hope you are too now. And maybe I've convinced you to break a bad habit that a lot of new writers have, using, colorful dialogue tags like ejaculated and shouted angrily and screamed angrily, and all those wonderful variations on something very similar. And if not, why don't you drop a comment down? We can have a discourse, a civil discourse. And again, I'm not saying that you can't write good stories like this using colorful dialogue tags. I'm simply highlighting it as a pet peeve. I personally think it's a bad idea because of all the reasons that I just listed. Anyways, once again, you can grab my anthology, Eldrtich, Blasphemies, and Technological Horrors on Amazon, Kindle, Smashwords, Apple iBooks, Barnes & Noble, and a bunch of other places. Link is in the description. Go check that out. By that, I'm probably going to be hosting giveaways and discounts and all sorts of stuff in the future with this anthology. And if you like what I do here, if you like this podcast, go ahead and smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that bell, because YouTube is stupid, and I will see you on the next Into the Astral Lands podcast.